Thank you for joining. The who will always matter, but the where and how matters more than ever. Sponsored by Media.net. And now, please welcome Doug Lauretano, SVP and GM, Media.net.
I'm Doug Lauretano of Media.net. Media.net is a contextual ad company. We're an ad tech company that's focused on a privacy first world. That doesn't only mean contextual for our next gen ad exchange. It also means working with our friends at LiveRamp and Universal ID and everybody else that is also trying to solve for how we move forward. I'm going to kick it off to Aysia first, and then Angelina, Joe, and Chris can introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. I'm Aysia Borsa. I am the president at Meredith Digital and the chief data officer, and excited to have a interesting, exciting conversation today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Angelina Eng. I'm the VP of Measurement and Attribution here at the IAB under the Programmatic and Data Center.
Thanks, Doug. I'm Joe Kowan. I am responsible for precision marketing for Spark Foundry, part of Publicis.
I'm Chris Kane. I lead a consultancy called Jounce Media, and we think about all of what is happening in the programmatic space, but our focus is sort of very much what today's conversation about, which is the changes and the evolution of the programmatic supply chain.
So before we got counted down into this room, the five of us were talking about ways that we could start preparing for further changes that we know are coming very soon. One of those ways is to lean on, but as I said earlier, not just replace with targeting that is contextual instead of identity-based. So I'm wondering what you guys feel about that.
It's very important to level set that the conversation has always been about audience, and it always will be about audience as far as I'm concerned, right? There are a number of different proxies for audience, context being a super important one, it always has been. Unfortunately, with programmatic, the rise in programmatic, that audience match, that cookie match became sort of front and center. And that's unfortunate because, as we know, the cookie match is not indicative of necessarily of exactly who we've always wanted to be in front of. So the pendulum sort of swung in that direction, and I think it's a good, healthy thing that it's swinging back, and context becomes more front and center as a proxy for audience. But it's still about audience. It's still about getting in front of the right audience at the right time with the right message.
So when you think about contextual, if you pair it with audience or a good identity solution, then you're reaching the audience you want to reach, but you're reaching them in the mind space that you want to reach them. So I would argue, yes, in many ways, contextual can be used as a proxy for audience, but then also it could be used to find the best time or best environment to reach that specific audience.
We're still talking about audiences, but the context around with which the audience is being or being defined. I think actually publishers can play a big role there, right? So marketers are still going to say, I want to reach this audience. And so as publishers with first party data, we can take a look at our audiences, because we're still going to have be able to target against our audiences, but to say, okay, this is the audience you want to reach. By the way, this is the context that they are engaging in. This is what we know about them. These are the signals that actually are going to help you identify and reach the audience you want to reach using contextual targeting. So I think we have a big role to play there. And I think as for publishers, we should become a little bit more innovative in terms of how we can do contextual targeting, right? I think that's what we've been talking about. This should be the era of testing and trialing new ways and new contextual targeting. But we also recognize that for this to be as appealing to marketers, at scale, we do need to align with other publishers and the marketplace to come up with what are those standard taxonomies that are not too high level, that they don't become meaningful, but somewhere in the middle where we can align to make sure that we don't drive marketers to the walled gardens, and that we have a seat at the table in this next phase.
You know, publishers have something that the walled gardens don't. They have rich content. You know, in most, you know, when you're considering most walled gardens, that's usually not the case. You know, they were built to be, you know, basically eyeball traps for, you know, that then could be monetized with advertising. So it's almost like publishers are better served selling with contextual.
I was going to say, and I think what's important also is it's not just about the audiences and being able to contextually target them or be contextually relevant, but is looking at the creative. You know, having creative align with whatever whatever the content is on the page, or in terms of context as well. I think that really helps to drive, you know, users to interact with your brand a little bit more, and also creates a level of awareness.
I think that's a really good point. You know, basically, you know, when we talk about the where, you know, if you can make your creative fit that environment better, then you're going to get more engagement, which is going to drive return on ad spend for Joe and his clients. And you know, that's what this is all about. Contextual is part of the key on making this work, but it's definitely not the only thing. And you know what? One of the things that Aysia said earlier, let's start doing it now. You know, now when we have some bit of the old way left, you know, we still have, you know, 50% or so, you know, cookie penetration, you know, in most cases. So let's start, you know, a lot of testing. Let's do a lot of trying of things and, you know, find a path forward to how, you know, whatever the new normal is going to be, which is going to include some, you know, some identity solution, whether it be cohorts or whether it be something more specific. But contextual can be an interesting constant from now or even before now until later.
Hey, Doug, I have a question for you. And that's, how has contextual targeting changed in the last couple of years? How, you know, in terms of its level of sophistication? I know that there's been lots of concerns around brand suitability and being able to understand context and sentiment. From your perspective, like, where are we, and how quickly are we advancing into, you know, being able to tackle on or address a lot of those?
Sure. I think over the last 5 to 10 years, most people think about contextual as brand safety. Publishers get angry that there's these blanket sledgehammer-like brand safety controls that limit spend coming through to them, and just generally when the buy side thinks contextual, they think of brand safety blocks, and that's what some you know, some of the leading contextual companies have focused on. Media.net's been around for 10 years, and we've been focused on contextual for 10 years, but we've actually been using it to enable performance marketing spend in display environments. So in a way, we've been eating our own dog food. You know, basically, we've been working on positive targeting, not negative exclusion. So it's a pretty drastic difference. And so I think over the last few years, those that were purely focused on negative targeting had started to look more at positive targeting instead. But I don't think that it's broadly something that's well adopted at this point. So I would say, as an industry, I think technology can improve across the board. And I think that there's more and more, opportunity for positive contextual targeting that's gonna drive real outcomes for marketers.
I completely agree with that. And the focus, I've actually never heard you use that language, but that focus on negative targeting, I think has been really damaging for the industry. We work with a bunch of marketers. They feel no obligation to fund the news. Like, that's not their job. Their job is to sell product. And in an environment that has excess supply, if there's risk of some sort of a negative reaction to where their brand is appearing, they're just going to play it safe. And to reorient this whole thing around like, no, this is not about like protecting from brand safety risk. This is about driving performance. That has to happen. That has to be the marketer's mindset for there to be credible alternatives to sort of one-to-one audience targeting.
Right, and it seems like it's like not that big of a difference, but when you're doing negative targeting or exclusion, you're fine with the word kill is just an assumption that it's an article about murder. When obviously that word could be used, and most technology companies will look at individual keywords and not really understand the actual article and the tone of it, what's really being said. So turning that on its head and actually trying to find environments that are either just great for the headspace of the user or are a proxy for audience, like Joe said, it's a different animal. It's a very different approach. But I think we can get there.
Yeah, I think that contextual doesn't have to be just a keyword, right? To your point, it's much more and should be much more sophisticated. The sentiment, the themes, right, around what the experience is all about. Number one. Number two, I would say, a lot of focus, as we all know, especially in the last year, is like bottom of the funnel, performance-driven, media executions. And what I will tell you is, all of our click to cart, so to speak, experiences are usually happening within the contextual environment, right? That's when it's going to perform the best. So it's not that we can't target against an audience, but if we're trying to drive someone into a cart, it's usually happening in, that contextually rich environment. So there's it again, when we think about contextual, I think sometimes it's too much of either it's a negative versus a positive, which I thought was really interesting that you said earlier, but also it's not just about a keyword, right? It's much more sophisticated and there's a lot more options. Hence the conversation of what are the different ways that we can offer contextual targeting. It's not just one size fits all or one specific offering. I think there's a lot more we could be doing in a really smart way.
To that somehow sentiment also needs to be somehow inserted into that content taxonomy, right? Because like you said, the word shoot or kill can be used in so many different ways. But being able to understand the sentiment or the context around that. So is it around sports and what are the combinations? I think those are things that is definitely needed to help identify what's appropriate and what's not appropriate.
I think there's two things, and it comes down to taxonomy and then like underlying tech that is putting things into that taxonomy. And what Angelina said about, the word shoot or what have you, to me, the problem with the way that it's been done in the past has more to do with the technology that's putting things into a taxonomy and not necessarily the taxonomy. But it all comes down to education and education of both sides, particularly on the buy side, like really making folks understand what they can target and how impactful it can be. One of the things that we do is that we work with a marketer and we'll show them where they bought on our exchange and allow them to basically map it to conversions. So they can see, whatever their conversion metric is, they can see how they drove outcomes, what environment the user was in. So it's completely post facto, but they can learn more about what contextual can do for them, and they can get exposed to different types of contextual segments that they may not be familiar with.
I would also add that we've sort of seen this coming for quite some time, right? We've been looking at the mobile environments for a long time now, and seeing limited tracking and measurement issues and targeting issues, and the cookie apocalypse and these poor people getting depressed. I mean, I hope they're not just suddenly depressed. They should be depressed for a long time if this is a depressing subject. But the reality is, sophisticated marketers have been honing their first party data strategy for quite some time, right? So the sort of shock to the system that I think we're all sort of talking about, I think it's there's some big changes coming, but again, for marketers that are sophisticated, that have been thinking this through, that have been thinking about their strategy, they have that first party data, right? They have the deep, meaningful relationships with the platforms that can interoperate across these different environments. And so, yes, so I think absolutely figuring out where we don't have those connection points, right? Where we don't have that interoperability, how to use different proxies like context, as good, meaningful opportunities to engage with an audience that otherwise maybe we're not seeing.
The watch out here from my perspective is the incentives for companies on the sell side are going to change pretty quickly here. Because most marketers aren't doing, Joe, what you were just saying, and sort of planning methodically how to sort of get hyper organized and be future proofed. Most marketers are going to turn on their DSP someday and realize their retargeting campaigns aren't scaling and they're not going to know what to do. Anyway, I think what winds up happening here is it just changes the incentives for companies on the sell side. And Angelina hit on a really key point earlier. To make contextual work, there has to be standardization. Aysia, I'm completely aligned with your point of view that there's also space there for publishers to build unique capabilities, but also adopt the standards. Anyway, that's one component for making contextual successful. But the other one is, I don't know what the right word is for this, seller trust, seller reputability. Meredith's properties nicely meet both of these standards. It's contextually rich content from a highly reputable, highly trusted seller. There's going to be supply out there, obviously, that is not contextually rich from a reputable seller. That's a challenging thing. But there's also a lot of not very reputable sellers. And for the last decade, the way those not reputable sellers made money was audience targeting. Do things to manufacture supply for audiences that marketers want to target. Well, when that goes away, those companies don't disappear. They start to manufacture supply that is contextually attractive to marketers. And there seems to be a whole thing in the industry about making sure that marketers can actually trust the contextual signals that they're getting from sellers, either because they only work with reputable sellers or because they have partners, maybe like media.net, that sort of do that rigorous auditing to make sure that the context really is what the marketer wants.
And that's a good segue into our other topic, thank you, Chris, talking about media chain transparency, and how both the sell side and the buy side, can benefit from lots of things that IAB Tech Lab has been doing around initiatives to make things more transparent, and that actually Chris and Jounce Media have been working to educate some folks on the marketer side on basically finding the best path to real inventory. I think all of these things, the goal is to bring buyers and sellers closer together. Media.net's an exchange. And our goal is not to come in between a buyer and a seller. Our goal is to make buying and selling more efficient. And to create scale and enhance, ad opportunities, and again, drive return on ad spend. So Joe, I was curious how Precision thinks about all things related to sellers.json, ads.text, all the initiatives that IAB Tech Lab has rolled out.
Sure. I mean, we're big fans. We're big fans of anything that is cleaning up the nonsense. And Doug, I think you did a good job describing that earlier, right? And just to reiterate, I mean, that the democratization of media that's happened over the past decade and more, enabled by programmatic, didn't come with all ups. There was a lot of downs, right? And so I think whatever initiatives we can align on and link arms on with publishers, with quality publishers like a Meredith, right? We're all for. Because ultimately, where we find the best return on our marketers' ad spend is getting as close to the publisher and quite literally their ad server as possible, right? So forging those relationships, those meaningful partnerships, they pay out huge dividends, and we're excited to see more and more consumption moving away from just the long tail, of the net and moving more into direct partnerships.
Cool. So Aysia, how does Meredith kind of think about media chain transparency and going forward?
Well, I mean, I think I kind of agree with what Joe said, and we work with Jounce and Chris's team. So, we participate in all of the standards that are out there. I think that, it's something beneficial for us to raise our hand and increase the transparency in the supply chain. That only benefits us. I do think there's a lot more direct conversations happening across the board, whether it's about identity or data sharing or the contextual conversation we're having today. Joe and I were talking about, hearing from major CPGs to a pharma company this morning saying, how can we make contextual targeting more beneficial to you, right? So help us understand the level that you need to get to. So, having that dialogue, I think, is really important.
I think today we touched on some really important points. The way that, to me, what's interesting is that these are not two separate topics. There's very much some really interesting things around transparency when it comes to contextual. What Chris said earlier about how, the bad actors may kind of shift from being bad actors in the audience world to being bad actors in the contextual world, I think that's harder. And I think that when we're talking about really strong, robust, positive contextual targeting, that technology should be able to sort out who are the bad actors and can provide even more transparency in the media chain, and hopefully will get us in a much better place.